We are called to double listening, listening to both the Word and the world. We listen to the Word with humble reverence, anxious to understand it, and resolved to believe and obey what we have come to understand. We listen to the world with critical alertness, anxious to understand it too, and resolved not necessarily to believe and obey it, but to sympathize with it and to seek grace to discover how the gospel relates to it.
There are many gods in the world, there are many religions, but of course not all ways of understanding God are the same. Is there one God or are there many gods? Is the God far away from us? Is it near to us? And each of these different ways of understanding God has huge implications for the way we think of society and culture and ourselves as individuals. There are four features, I think, of the biblical understanding of God that make this God a particularly compelling basis upon which to build the sort of society that I think we all want to live in. First of all, this God is separate from creation. Secondly, he's both personal and absolute. Thirdly, he's Trinity. And fourthly, this is a God of love. And each of these 4 points has huge implications for the way that we think about culture and society, ourselves, and the way that we live together. What I want to do in this session is to explore each of these points in turn. And we're going to see along the way how each of them contributes to shaping a distinctively biblical approach to culture and to society. So then the first distinctive is that God is separate from the world that he's created. Now, some theologians have called this the creator-creature distinction. The term captures the idea that there are two, and only two, fundamentally different types of existence. There's God's existence, and there's the existence of the universe that God has created, with God in the larger circle above, separate from and ruling over his creation down below. God is not the same sort of thing as the universe that he's created. The theologian Cornelius Van Til puts it this way. He says, God's existence is infinite, eternal, and unchangeable. But the creation, by contrast, exists in a derivative, finite, temporal, and changeable way. In other words, God has always existed, will always exist, and his existence doesn't rely on anything outside of himself. He doesn't need anything else to be who he is. But the existence of the created universe relies on God. And this creator-creature distinction sets the biblical account apart from the dominant picture of reality in our own culture, which holds that there's only one sort of existence. And this idea that there's only one existence is called monism. Everything that exists, for monism, exists in the same way. Van Til represents this monistic view by a diagram comprising just one circle, to show that for this view, everything that exists in exactly the same way, inside the same circle of existence. For such monist views, all existence is usually traced back to some underlying reality, such as fire or air or water for the ancient pre-Socratic philosophers, or perhaps matter/energy for 21st century science. It's important to note that the difference between a two-circle and a one-circle view of the universe is not the same as the difference between theism and atheism. It's quite possible, for example, to accommodate gods within a monistic view of the universe, and this is more or less what happens in ancient Greece and Rome with their pantheon of deities. Now, the difference is between whether God or the gods or the ultimate principle of reality, whatever it is, whether that is part of the universe and therefore reliant upon the universe, or whether God, the gods, or the ultimate principle of reality are separate, distinct from the universe, and therefore independent of that universe. That's the key difference. So why then does the creator-creature distinction matter so much? Well, not to put too fine a point on it, it changes our relationship to God completely. It's basic to everything that Christians think about reality. Let me give you a concrete example. If God is separate from the universe that he's created, then he doesn't need that universe to be who he is. He doesn't need us in order to be who he is. Now, this is the point that Paul makes to the assembled Areopagus in Acts 17 when he says,
"The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. Rather, he himself gives everyone life and breath and everything else."
What is Paul saying here? He's saying God already owns all of our treasure, all of our time, all of our talents. He already owns our very selves. What could we possibly give to this God that he does not already possess? And by contrast, the Bible describes people and the creation as utterly dependent on the God who gives us life and breath and everything. Now contrast this with a monistic view, where you and I and everything that exists, including any gods if they exist, are all on the same level. In this sort of world, both God and I rely on the universe. We're both part of it. We can't exist without it. We both need it. And therefore we can come to arrangements to satisfy each other's needs. And this is how almost all religions in the world work. Now, human beings are in some variation of a bartering relationship with the gods. I offer the gods something that they desire. It might be my praise, my time, my talents. And then I can hope to receive something back from the gods. As a reward, I scratch their back and they scratch mine. And this is a signature move not only of almost all the world's religions, but also of most of the world's cultures, and certainly of our culture today. And we call this common way of relating to either ultimate reality or to other people, this way of bartering, striking business deals in order to get what we want. We're going to call this an N-shaped dynamic. The upward curve on the left-hand side of the N is that I first of all make a sacrifice to the God, and then the downward curve on the right-hand side is that the God, in response, gives me what I want. This sort of monistic world is ruled by a logic of the business deal. It is what social theorists would call an exchange economy. It's a society built on deals struck between contracting parties. In its religious guise, it's characterized by manipulating the gods, by giving them something that they want in order to get what I want. In its secular guise, it governs corporate culture. But increasingly today, it also governs private life as well, in what the philosopher Michael Sandel has called the marketization of society. Sandel argues that we've drifted from having a market economy to becoming market societies. Everything is negotiated, bought and sold, including even love, security, and identity. Imagine, if you will, a world where everything is contract, everything is a business deal, everything is a negotiation struck for mutual benefit. Our relationships with our families, for example, or with our partners, or with the world we live in, they're all business deals, calculated to maximize our personal profit and benefit, however we understand that. Well, this is the grain of reality in the monist universe. You scratch my back, society, gods, friends, family, and I will scratch yours. It gives us a pattern of society, doesn't it, in which we compete for common resources, in which we compete for benefit, where the strong can thrive and those with nothing to exchange are left behind. But the Bible, wonderfully, makes a mockery of that way of thinking. We can't strike a deal with God when He gives us everything we have. Now, the God of the Bible relates to His world not in an economy of exchange, but through an economy of the gift. See, our primary relationship to ultimate reality is not as a hard-nosed negotiator, but as a joyous recipient of God's generous and unmerited gifts to us. And this literally turns the N-shaped dynamic of exchange and bartering on its head, making it into a U-shaped dynamic of gift and gratitude. So God first of all reaches down to us in unmerited grace. That's the left-hand side of the U. And then we respond in joyful and obedient thanks to the God who blessed us. And therefore, gratuity, the free gift, not reciprocity, not the business deal, is at the heart of the Bible's view of reality and our relationship to ultimate reality. It's a picture of human beings not as wheeler-dealers in a corporate boardroom, striking deals to get ahead, but as joyful children on Christmas morning, receiving unexpected gifts from loving parents. Imagine a world in which the poor and the weak are not cast aside because they have nothing to put on the table in the business deal, but are cared for and honoured. The God of the Bible gives freely to those who cannot stand on their own 2 feet, to those who cannot cut a deal with Him. And this gives us the pattern of a society shot through with compassion a society of helping the needy when they've got no means to pay back, of reaching out to the poor and the ungrateful when they're utterly unable to repay. It lays the foundation for the sort of caring, compassionate society that I think deep down we all really want to live in, and that we'd like our families to live in, especially at the times when we're aware of our family's neediness. So let me then ask you directly, which sort of society would you prefer to live in? One where the fundamental way that we relate to ultimate reality and to each other in society is through contract and exchange, through bargaining, through maximising our benefit? Or one based upon lavish generosity and compassion? The next distinctive of a biblical view of God is that he's both personal and absolute. Now, there have been many candidates in the history of philosophy for the most basic archetypal substance in the universe. The pre-Socratic philosophers Thales and Anaximander and Anaximenes are famous for suggesting respectively that everything is fundamentally made out of water, or an unlimited substance, apeiron in Greek, or that everything is made out of air. And scientists today think that the most fundamental thing in the universe may be energy. But what about the Bible? When we dig right down on a biblical view of the universe, to the most fundamental substance that can't be broken down into anything more simple, that's preceded by nothing, when we get down to the very bedrock principle of the universe, what is it that our spade strikes against? Well, the answer, wonderfully, is personality. God is personal, and there's nothing before God, nor is there anything more basic or fundamental than God. His personal can't be broken down into more simple building blocks such as atoms or forces or even ideas. Personality in our universe goes all the way down and all the way back. Before anything existed, there was the personal God. And the truth of God's irreducible personality is a dynamite with the potential to revolutionize the way that the Christian thinks about absolutely everything. For a start, it gives a huge dignity to the very notion of the person. Think about it this way. If personality is something that's just happened to emerge somewhere down the evolutionary line, and that, who knows, will disappear once again sooner or later, then it's hard on that basis to conclude that there's anything particularly meaningful about such a transient, emergent property. It's like a wave on the ocean with no fundamental cosmic significance. But if personality is irreducible and fundamental in the universe, then all persons have a worth and a dignity that cannot be taken away from them. And they have this dignity not because they're intelligent, not because they're strong, not because they're powerful, but because they are persons. Which means that everyone has the same dignity. However intelligent, however strong, however powerful they are. As theologian John Frame puts it, the two possibilities are that either the impersonal reduces to the personal, or the personal reduces to the impersonal. And those are two very different universes to live in. So let me ask you again, if I could, which one do you feel is more satisfying? Which one do you think makes the basis for a fairer, more compassionate society? A universe where everything personal reduces ultimately to the impersonal, or a universe where everything impersonal reduces to the personal God? So then the biblical God is personal, but he's not just personal. He's also absolute. The God of the Bible isn't the only God of the ancient or modern worlds who's personal. The ancient Greeks and Romans had as many personal gods as you could shake a stick at. And as Paul discovered in Athens in Acts 17, even more that you couldn't. What is unique about the biblical God is not simply that he's personal, but that he is personal and absolute. Where absolute means that he's self-sufficient, self-contained, not relying on anything outside himself for his existence, and that he's fundamental, not able to be broken down into any more basic parts. And this compound of personality and absoluteness, what theologians have called absolute personality theism, is unique to the biblical God. Many religions of the East, for example, know of absolute deities, principles, life forces, world souls, and Aristotle has his absolute prime or unmoved mover. But all of these absolute deities aren't persons, and so we're forced to choose between a cold, impersonal, absolute reality and a personal but local and finite deity. And this choice is a tragedy because the absolute gives you the universal, it gives you science, stability, the avoidance of chaos. And the personal gives you dignity, humanitarianism, love, and compassion. But wonderfully, the Bible shows us that this is a false dichotomy. And in fact, absolute personality cuts across this false dichotomy, conforming neither to the impersonal absolute, nor to the non-absolute personal. And we are going to see this move again and again in the coming weeks. It's a move we're going to call diagonalization, when the Bible refuses a false dichotomy offered to us by our culture and shows us a richer, more satisfying reality, in relation to which the two poles of the false dichotomy are revealed to be reductive heresies of the more complex, richer biblical truth. So then we need to hold both the absoluteness and the personality of God together in order to see the wonder of the biblical account. Because neither God's absoluteness nor his personality is more ultimate than the other. Neither of them can act as a foundation for the other. They're equally radical, they're equally basic, and they are utterly inseparable. As well as being absolute and personal, God is also a Trinity. We might want to ask ourselves, so what? What implications does this have? Well, for one thing, it means that just in the same way that in our universe personality is not an emergent property, but is fundamental to the fabric of reality, so also relationship is woven into the universe right from the very beginning. Not something that enters into our reality later on. God is not, first of all, a single person who then enters into a relationship with other persons. His being is relational right from the very beginning. Relationships, therefore, are fundamental and non-reducible in our universe. And this again presents an alternative to two dichotomous tendencies that characterize traditional and modern societies. Most traditional societies value community identity, but they do so at the expense of the welfare of the individual, stifling individuality and insisting on a deadening conformity to the norm. Most modern societies, by contrast, value the atomized individual at the expense of the welfare of the community. They focus everyone in on their own self-expression at the expense of some of the weakest and most vulnerable among us. But again, the Christian Trinity diagonalizes this false dichotomy. It neither crushes the individual under the weight of community norms and conformity, nor does it destroy community for the sake of individual self-realization. What it gives us is a pattern for relationships of mutual service, mutual respect, mutual flourishing. But we can go even further than this. The Trinity aren't just in some sort of generic, vanilla-flavoured relationship. If we cast our eye again and again over the verses in the Bible that refer to God's activity before creation, we see that these intra-Trinitarian relationships are characterized consistently not by discord, not by competition, not by rivalry, much less by apathy, but actually by love. The verses in the Bible that talk about the Trinity before creation talk about the loving relationship between Father and Son. And this, my dear friend, means that we live in a universe in which love, as the Bible understands love, is fundamental and primary. Now, for views of the world where love isn't primary, it's often power that takes its place of ultimacy. And this is certainly true of the ethic of the ancient Roman Empire, for example. Jupiter, chief among the gods, keeps order in the divine pantheon by exercising his superior power and cunning over the other gods. In a similar way, raw power through coercion, the Latin word is potestas, played an important structuring role in both military conquest and in Roman law. In fact, modern secular politics also seeks to construct power and conflict as that which is most fundamental to social relations. And in doing this, it shares with Roman potestas a fundamental commitment to violence, whether it realizes it or not. Theologian John Milbank puts it this way. He says, "There emerges to view a hidden thread of continuity between antique reason and modern secular reason. This thread of continuity is the theme of original violence." But it's only when we begin with the Trinity that we see that love and not power, that peace and not violence is fundamental to the way things are in our universe. And Milbank again argues that Christianity uniquely does not allow violence any ontological purchase. It means that violence is not fundamentally the way things are, the way things work in our universe. And therefore the Christian Trinity introduces a very attractive alternative to the reduction of personhood to will, and the reduction of will to power. So instead of a will to power, Christian Trinitarian theism brings to the heart of reality a will to charity, to agape love. And this inscribes itself, rather than the will to power, at the heart, therefore, of society and of relationships. As we look back on these four distinctives of a biblical view of God, I think what we can see is that someone's picture of ultimate reality, whether that's God or gods or an ultimate principle, matter, for example, has very far-reaching and practical consequences for our understanding of society and of culture. It has implications for whether we think that exchange and contracts are the fundamental basis of society, or compassion and giving ourselves for each other. It has implications for whether we think that the atomized individual, or the homogeneous group, or the individual in relationship is the fundamental building block of society. And it has implications for whether we think that power or love is the fundamental driving force of social relationships, whether violence or peace is primary in the way that things are. It has consequences from everything from the organisation of the family, through politics, to our understanding of what's most fundamental about us as human beings. And another thing that we've seen in this session is that there's a very stark opposition between a Christian Trinitarian conception of God, where love is the most fundamental way of relating in the universe, and a view shared by ancient and much modern secular thought of absolute sheer power as the fundamental dynamic of the universe and of the will and of society. Next week we'll be looking at the opening 2 chapters of Genesis to explore together how God created and what and who God created. And once more, we're going to see that in these chapters we've got important signature moves of the Bible that shape our view of culture, of society, of ourselves, and of the world.